Welcome back to our second Revelations episode. Today it's just me and Duncan.
Hello.
So, in Revelations 1, saying no as a GM, you brought up running a mystery.
I prefer First Revelations.
In First Revelations, you brought up mystery running, which is something that we have talked about a lot, playing, running mysteries in TTRPGs. And you very specifically said you wanted to kind of plant a flag for that topic as a future subject. So I figured that would be a perfect one for us to do as our second episode.
Yeah, this is a topic that I think you and I have probably discussed many times. I don't remember what specifically I said during First Revelations, but in a nutshell, I'll just spray a couple of things at you and then kind of let you pick where you want to go. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of, I don't know what you want to call it, styles of sessions that you could run. Like if you're running a D&D game, there are dungeon crawls and there are hex crawls where you're doing more like overworld exploration, and there's political intrigue type stuff, and there are mystery games where the players are trying to solve some kind of mystery. And I think that this is one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging type of session to run for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure we'll get into those. I think it's very satisfying if done well, and can be really uniquely frustrating if not done well.
Yes.
On both sides of the table. Mm-hmm. And that does look very different, though. And some systems are really not well suited to running mysteries. Some are specifically tailored for mysteries. And it's really crucial to get tone right, which is very much a group effort. And that's probably enough to start with.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is most interesting that you said is systems being good or bad for running a mystery, because my first instinct when you said that was like, well, it's not about the system, it's about, which, it, again, gut reaction, but I don't think it's true. I think you're right. I think that the mechanics of a system can make it more obvious to players, like what they have at their disposal in order to solve a mystery. So let's take D&D as an example. Mysteries tend to involve, more skill checks than combat a lot of times. Not that there's no combat, but usually it's, it's the players using their own reasoning abilities to try to figure out what's going on, and then their players rolling some skill checks to, see if they can coax something out of a witness, or see if they can find a piece of evidence, or something like that. So, but when you look at the skill list for D&D, most of them don't seem like they're gonna, sort of obviously be related to your typical mystery that you might expect to be solving. Like, the odds of you using animal handling, pretty slim. There's a couple of them that seem like they're gonna be happening all the time, like investigation, perception, and stealth. And then maybe something like Arcana, to like, oh, is this thing that I'm holding magical, or something like that. But compare that to systems that are more investigation oriented. There's probably things on the character sheet that make it more obvious that their character is capable of doing more things in order to be able to roll to try to progress through the mechanical side of interacting with the mystery. So I think that there's a mechanics side to it, but what you were kind of describing in the second half of what you were talking about is the sort of the design of the mystery, which is influenced by mechanics. But
well, let's stick with the first bit
okay.
for a minute. So yeah, you're definitely onto something with the skill breakdown of the given system. Mm-hmm. So for D&D,
which I'm sorry, just to interject, I don't mean that to say that that's the end all be all is the skill checks. It's just that is a big part of the way you interact with it.
No question. But in addition to that, it's also a big part of what a player can actually contribute in the character creation process.
Right.
And so there are going to be differences here between if you have a kind of mystery side quest or a chapter to a larger campaign, or you are running some kind of one shot where people are specifically tailoring characters to a particular scenario. And so I guess I'm leaning more towards the second one, because that I've done both of these things, but most systems where you're going to be running mysteries, just in practice, it seems like those tend to be 1 or 2 shots. If I told you, hey, tomorrow night I'm going to run a mystery scenario and it's going to be in D&D 5e, you would pump all your stats into Whiz and Int.
Right.
Because there are like 2-3 skill checks that are going to be you're gonna make over and over.
Yeah.
But an underlying assumption there is that you need to roll dice in order to get the hints that you're going to need to piece things together as a player.
Right, or to even uncover them. Like, if I don't roll investigation high enough, then my character won't look under the bed and, whatever.
And you know exactly where I'm going with this, and we're going to talk about Gumshoe. So this is an incredibly divisive topic, but I'll kind of walk you through the scenario here. I'm the DM. You're the player. I put you in this, you're like in a particular scene in this mystery, and it's clear to you as a player that there is a clue to be obtained here. And I tell you, well, okay, go ahead and make whatever check. Let's say you're interviewing a suspect, and you're pretty sure as a player that they're holding out some key piece of information from you.
Right, roll some insight to see, or intimidation to get out of them.
Can I make an insight check to see if...
Right.
So I say, yeah, you know what, go ahead, make an insight check.
I got a 7.
You got a 7, and I go, well, you think he's being pretty honest.
Yeah,
pretty forthcoming guy.
Right, so as a player, I'm now saying, like, well, I know he's not, but my character, right, if I'm trying not to metagame, my character thinks he's being honest. Well,
right, and that can be really frustrating and irritating. Because you know that, like, well, fuck. Like, I as a player, did everything I could there, and I just don't get that clue. So this is the problem that Gumshoe is, like, designed to solve. And the idea is, in this system, which is really tailor-made for mysteries, if you make the right moves as a player, if you make the right attempts, and you have sufficient just baseline points in your skills and stuff like that, you will get at least the like standard version of that clue. If you roll really well, or you spend some additional points from like a pool that you have, you can get like a premium version of the clue. Maybe you get a little extra. But you can play the game confident that you as a player will be given some minimum amount of clues that you need to solve the mystery, and you're not just going to be iced out of it by bad luck.
Yeah.
And that can be very valuable. And here's one of the reasons why this is so divisive, though. There's a school of thought, and I'm sympathetic to this, that if there's no real chance of failure, then you've just kind of trivialized everything.
Yeah,
So-
I can understand that, but I will say that just because you're saying, like, I think there's still a lot of room for, like, player failure there. You're saying the dice alone can't make you fail anymore, right? You can still fail plenty. Like,
Well, and
you
we'll
can
get
draw
to
the
that.
wrong conclusions.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
And you're right. And this is, those are really the like components of this issue.
Yeah.
But I want to revisit the skill breakdown stuff.
Okay.
So we've made fun of D&D a little bit with respect to mysteries, where we've said, okay, there really just aren't that many applicable skills or stats.
Right. It's a very general system that has a couple things tailored sort of in that direction, but...
And many people have said this, D&D is like generally, it's very broadly good, but it's not excellent at really any specific mode of play.
Yeah.
The things I said before, dungeon crawls or hex crawls or whatever, because it's meant to be pretty good at everything. Well, other more specialized systems, and now I'm looking at Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green and systems like this that are meant to be investigative. Delta Green has something like 40 skills.
Yeah, 42, I believe.
No, that's the answer to a different question.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
But yeah, it's more skills, so the breakout is much more granular, and for a given investigation, there may be several skills that might be, or for a given like specific scene, there may be several ways to get at a piece of information, and they're like each discrete Delta Green skills. And this is good for a couple of reasons. It's good because characters who are, or players who are very fastidious in assigning their skill points are rewarded. It's also mechanically different because, and different handlers do this differently, but in Delta Green, my interpretation, I don't remember what the book says, but my interpretation was if you're essentially not under a lot of pressure at the time, just having points in the skill is often good enough to succeed on what would be a check in another system.
Right.
If you are under the gun, if there's some kind of time pressure, you're trying to do it in combat, you're under duress in some way, then you have to roll. But of course, if you have more points in the skill, you're more likely to succeed on that check. But that is really cool for a player. Like, if you can really save the team by investing points in some like niche skills. And there are so many skills because it's supposed to be more realistic. And when I say realistic, we're talking about like X-Files realistic.
Sure. More realistic than D&D anyway.
More realistic than D&D, but the idea is like there is no way that you're going to be an excellent driver and gunslinger and accountant and botanist and
psychologist and
right. You don't have enough points to do that. You do have to make hard decisions about where you're going to specialize, but it's a game that greatly benefits from having a well-rounded team. I think that winds up working very well, but I would not want to play like if we were going to play a campaign where we were going to be constantly kicking in doors and like getting into very detailed gunfights. Delta Green is not the right system for that.
Yeah.
And so, D&D, broadly good, not excellent at any particular thing. Delta Green, excellent at its niche, and it gets weaker the farther away you get from that.
Yeah.
So just a brief recap there. Important concepts I think are the granularity of the skills, the kind of general thrust of like what the skills are, and then the mechanics behind making checks, or whether or not checks are even required to get at important components of solving the mystery, clues, or just general information gathering.
I will say that I think there is a way to take a system like D&D, which is generally good for a lot of things, but maybe not specifically good for investigations. I think there is a way to bridge that gap a little bit, and I think that it is easier to do if you're doing like a campaign where you're familiar with the characters. Like, it's not a one shot where you just learn these characters. I think that if you look at a lot of the like non-combat abilities or spells that are available in not just D&D but similar systems as well, players can do interesting things. So, for example, in D&D, if you're playing a rogue assassin, the assassin gets a bunch of advantages to, like, if they attack somebody before they've taken a turn in combat, they do a bunch of extra damage and stuff like that. But they also have a bunch of abilities of, like, being able to disguise themselves and, be some sort of roleplay infiltration style stuff. And so if you take a look at your players' character sheets and what abilities they have, you'll find that, most players in a lot of games will not ever really use like half the things that they can do.
Well, so that takes us down an interesting, I think, more general question, which is at what level are we making checks?
Well, but what I meant to say, or just to complete the thought, what you can do is it may not be that your party is or that system is well suited to running some specific idea for a mystery that you have. But if you craft the mystery around abilities that the people in your party have, like it is going to take a little more work, and you're going to have to come up with some new stuff, but you can take advantage of the things that your characters can do to give them some sort of interesting like mechanical things they can do to overcome the particular challenges of the investigation that you present them with.
Yes.
So it's harder and goes along with the idea that a system like D&D or similar sort of generalized systems are not necessarily optimal for generally solving mysteries, but you can still within those systems create encounters that are an investigation mystery type thing that, given the specific abilities that your player characters have, can make it seem like, hey, actually this system is good for it. And it's like, well, it's really not. I've just made one that is tailored for your characters. So again, more work, but you can make it work.
Yes. Yeah, I think I agree with all that. I do want to get at something that I guess both of us has mentioned by this point, which is the system is important, but it's not the most important thing. Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing here is commitment from everyone at the table that they're going to solve. They're going to be doing a mystery and they're going to get the tone right, and they're not going to metagame.
Right. Or like a burn it down kind of thing too can happen if people get frustrated with it.
Well, and we'll cover that too.
Call that the Gordian knot solution.
But so I've said this before when we've talked about horror games. Mm-hmm. So it only takes one person to contaminate the tone, and there are two basic ways to watch a horror movie. Way number one is you sit there quietly and you turn the lights down and you get good and scared, and you appreciate the tension that the movie brings. The second way is to talk through the movie and kind of say oh no, don't go up those stairs, or and have fun with it. Mm-hmm. And everyone in the room has to watch the movie the same way.
Yeah.
You can't watch the movie the first way if someone else in the room wants to watch it the second way. And so playing a horror game is the same way, playing a mystery is the same way. And there's a lot of overlap here too, right? A lot of these are horror mysteries or they're otherwise spooky. And so yeah, I think it's crucial that there be a commitment to everyone at the table realizes, okay, we know that these are kind of difficult to put on from all angles. We acknowledge that part of the interesting things, something that's going to make the mystery more fun is that I'm not going to know everything, and so I really need to not metagame. Right. For this reason, I really prefer to run closed tables where, whether in person or over Discord, if the group splits up, the group that I'm currently DMing for stays in the room and the rest of them leave. So I'm running a Delta Green game for a few friends right now. We do it at our office after work, and I'll sit in one office, and when they have scenes together, they're both in there with me, and then when they do individual scenes, one of them leaves. Mm-hmm. And it's really easy to manage the metagaming that way. Of course, right. Some people are probably not cool with the idea of so what, I'm going to spend 30% of the session not in the room. Yeah, I don't know, bring a book.
Right.
But and you have to manage that as a DM. If you have more than 3 people, that could get really irritating if you don't manage your time well. But
right, yeah, and someone's like, hey, I'm going to play this game tonight. Oh, I just sat in an empty room for 3 hours of it.
Right, but I mean, I know a lot of you are dumb and you like football. So just imagine it's like a football game. Where, it's it's on for 3.5 hours, but there's only, really 45 minutes of game. I know it's an hour, but even that is kind of cheated. So yeah, it's like that. This is a compromise you've already made in other parts of your life, so get over it.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. And I know we've done it virtually as well, where on Discord, if we're not doing it for Golden River Underground, but for Ultra Delta Green games we played, if my character splits off to go talk to somebody, and you deal with Jack's character first or whatever, then I go to the other voice lobby and I sit there until someone tells me to come back.
Well, and I'll tell you what, either if you ever get the opportunity to do this as a GM or like as a spectator, you will be astonished by how poorly people communicate with each other.
Oh yeah, no, I've been astonished both mostly as a player because I've never run a closed table, but yeah, where because especially when I do podcasts of it, I will afterwards I will hear everything that happened the first time around. Or like the thing that someone later relayed to me, and I'm like, that was their description of it. Like,
yes,
like,
right?
What? Like that was their summary of what happened. That wasn't even close.
This is a technique to maximize buy-in and minimize metagaming, but there's other stuff we have to talk about here, which is like the intelligence and problem-solving capabilities of players and their characters.
Yeah.
So, we all know that it's very common for players to make characters that are dumber than them. And in many cases, that's pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also very common for players to, a player will come up with a character. They'll write a character that's, a knuckle dragger that's really strong and great at combat, but isn't that smart. But then they really struggle to actually commit to not being able to figure things out.
Yeah.
And this is also where the reverse really shines, right? It's hard for many players to play a character that's dumber than they are. It's universally difficult to play a character that's smarter than they are.
Right.
So if you have you've got a buddy playing at your table who's like a pretty average dude in terms of smarts, and he is playing a wizard with 18 intelligence. Most of the time, all that means is he's got a really great spellcasting modifier.
Right.
Once it comes to mysteries,
he can't pretend to be smarter than he is.
Right. Imagine what a smarter person than you would do. Like imagine what they would put together with these clues. That becomes, more complicated. Famously, I really like if I think you guys are struggling to tell you to make an intelligence check and then like remind you of something you've already told you.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean this can get tricky, and it circles back to a point that you already made and that I poked you on, which is like how do we make these checks, or at what level are we making these checks? Like we've talked about, if a player wants to persuade an NPC of something, and we say like, oh, okay, make a charisma check or something like that. Once upon a time, I would have said, you don't have to make a whole speech or anything, but like roughly, what are you saying to convince them?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Matt Colville that gave some advice along the lines of like, no, like that's probably unnecessary. Like they have a charismatic character. They don't need to be charismatic in order to have a charismatic character.
Right. We talked about this in one of the Table Talk 19s way back in the day. It wasn't Matt Colville. It was a channel called Taking 20. And the video was called We Do Charisma Checks Backwards or something to that effect. Gotcha.
Well, yeah. I think that's important, but there's an extreme that where like if you don't role play any of it, it becomes like a point and click kind of game.
Yeah.
Where if it's just, hey, the suspect comes into the room and you say, I want to try to convince him to tell me everything he knows. I say, make a charisma check. And he says, I got a 20. And I say, all right, he tells you the following information. And I, flip over an index card that has bullet points on it. You probably don't want to play a game like that.
Well, I mean, some people do. Like if they are more about the mechanics than that. I don't think that's universally unappealing, but I do take your point.
It's not, and I play with people who prefer games like this. But I guess when I say you, I mean you.
Oh,
Shepard.
yeah, no, that is not my preference for sure.
And so I mean, generally, I want to do something that's more. I want to have these like long form, Tarantino scene kind of
sure,
like conversations. But it's tricky because I basically I don't want to. I want players to be able to play the kinds of characters they want to play, and I don't want them to have to be those characters in real life in order to be able to play them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sensitive to developing strategies to allow them to feel cool and do this in a cinematic kind of way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the interactive experience, but I mean that's kind of universal. I don't know how. I think we're getting a little sidetracked from mysteries.
True, but I guess the reason I think that this has its own angle is because mysteries tend to incorporate a level of real player problem solving that other ones don't.
Yes. Right. Most of the time, players they know what the solution is, and it's just about getting their characters to be able to make them happen. Whereas the mystery, it's not something that the players already know the answers to, and they're trying to get their characters to figure out. They're trying to figure it out too, by and large.
I'm glad you kind of pulled that out because that is the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, let's talk about tone.
Okay.
We've talked about it before. This is a tricky thing, and it's an important thing for every kind of game. But I think in anything where you're trying to keep tension and stakes wrapped up in the role playing and stuff like that, I don't know. I think it's particularly difficult and particularly vital. And so on the one hand, you can tell everybody what tone you want or what you're shooting for. You can recommend media. You can say hey, I'm kind of going for, this book or this movie or this TV show or something like that. You can put on ambient kind of music, or you can set the scene well in the room. But I don't know. I mean, it's I think the most crucial piece here is you've got to pick people that you think really want the same kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the exact same thing, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot. On my list of Revelations episodes I want to do, there's one that's about tone, so I don't know if we want to get too deep into tone specifically. No,
I'm fine with just keeping this, I guess, surface level and saving that for later.
Yeah,
it's
but I agree. Yeah, the short version is you got to know your table and know your players, and some people they're really into playing that stuff seriously, and a mystery a murder mystery kind of thing, or just something creepy in general, something supernatural, they're just going to dive into. And other players, they really struggle, if they're trying at all, to not make the fart jokes or whatever. And so you got to know your audience, and if know that you can't control it that much, and that most control you have is picking the people who are going to be there.
And furthermore, I think this is a case where it's not an experience thing, it's a personality thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know I play games with a lot of people now, and many of them are very experienced, have been playing for a long time, but they want to play games that are funny.
Mm-hmm.
And that's cool, and that works most of the time. I also play with people that are brand new and are really committed to matching tone and really like opportunities to be dramatic and serious.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with it's not like a learned skill or something. It's just it's a preference.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree. But to bring this kind of more clearly back to mysteries, when you're setting up a mystery, mysteries are not inherently spooky or scary, nor are they inherently, funny and, amusing. They can be anything. That you can have a mystery that's, suited for any tone.
Right. No,
So
you could have Psych, or you could have, the X-Files, or you could have Seven.
right, yeah, that's a great like spectrum that you're describing. And and yeah, so you can go for any of those, but think carefully about what kind of thing you're going for and the players you're going to have if you know them well enough, because it's much better, in my opinion, to try to create a mystery whose tone is a suit or a match for the table than trying to bring your table over to the tone that you think is best for your mystery, if the two don't match.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess my final plug that I'll put in on this is, you could say, hey, I'm going for 7, and you'll get people that go like, oh yeah, that's cool. I really like that movie. And then they'll show up and they'll just make 7 jokes and references the whole time.
Yeah. That is,
they'll be like, it's like ironic 7. Yeah. No, that's not what I meant.
That's the pitfall of trying to reference any media for any reason, is it can become just a magnet for memes.
Yeah.
And
I kind of like, I don't do this that frequently, but I want to do it more. I like showing pictures, like just kind of mood setters.
Yeah.
For scenes or characters or something like that. And just put it out on the table for people to like handle. Mm-hmm. I think, provided that you've gotten a group that you think is right for what you're trying to run, if you control the environment well, and the lighting is right, and the ambient sounds and music is right and stuff like that, and you put stuff like this out, that's pretty powerful. Yeah,
it can be. It can help to, one, I mean, it's mechanically useful in terms of giving them something to, shape their ideas around. But yeah, if you've got like a grisly murder scene picture, then if you're going for a more serious tone, like showing them that picture can help to, sober the room if things are getting a little out of hand, potentially. Yeah. Again, it's not an end-all be-all solution, but it can be something that can help shepherd the room in the direction you're going for.
Okay, so I want to take us to another point now, which is mystery structure.
Yeah, no, I wanted to get around to this point.
Okay, well, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, well, and I'm sure we're gonna have a couple directions we go with this, but the thing I wanted to start with was, we were kind of making light of like players being, stupid or ignorant or something like that earlier, but there is some tension between the person who is creating the mystery and already knows all the answers, and then communicating at least some of those well enough to the player so that they can put the pieces together in a way that naturally leads to the correct conclusion, which seems trivial when you know what the answer is, but if you've run mysteries before, you probably have experienced times where like your players come to a conclusion based on what you've told them that is perfectly reasonable and very wrong. Right? But you're like, oh wait, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like that is also a reasonable conclusion to come to. Or like they misread like one thing and it changes everything. Like there are a lot of structural pitfalls that you can have with the way you present mysteries, so that even when they have all the clues, it doesn't make sense when they don't already know the answer. And there are many things that go into that, but that's kind of the direction I wanted to start with.
Yeah, so I'll take it in a slightly different direction, which is it's very difficult to narrate a mystery scene, because you want to put everything that's available to investigate in front of the players, but not highlight, where the clues are.
Yeah.
But what that means is you either have to be really well prepared or really quick on your feet, because if you're describing, say, all of the NPCs, all the people that are there at that dinner party, and you forget to describe like maybe there's like, I don't know, there's like a butler or something who's like attending on people. And the character says, "Oh, well, like, what are there any like wait staff or servants or anything like that?" And you go, "Oh, yes, there are." And you start describing them like, well, you just kind of gave away that like clearly they're not important because
right.
Otherwise you would have mentioned them.
Right. It's like when they ask for an NPC's name and you're like, and you look at some like random table.
Right. They're like, well, that guy's not the murderer because the murderer has a name.
Right.
So you either have to be very meticulous or you have to be really fast. And I guess the old joke, and I can't remember what blog I read this on. It's probably the Alexandrian. But you know, it's something like, you know, the players are investigating. They've like broken into the home of one of the suspects, and they're like going through the items in his bedroom before he comes back from work or something. And the DM says like, okay, so there's a closet, and there's a bed. There's a bed sitting on a bed frame, and there's a chest of drawers, and there's one of those writing desks that's like shut at the top. And there's but it's not shut all the way. There's like something maybe preventing it from shutting all the way. And you're like, what do you want to check out? And the players are like, okay, well, I open the closet. What's in there? And you're like, there's just some clothes. There's really nothing interesting. Like, oh, okay. Well, I look under the bed. And you're like, yeah, there's just some shoes under there. Oh, okay. All right, I'm gonna leave. Right. And you're like, are you sure you want to leave? And they're like, yeah.
It's like, what about the thing I described in way more detail? Maybe you should look at that.
Okay. So I guess what I'm getting at there is, it can be difficult to follow what a DM is trying to lay out in a room. Like it can just be difficult to visualize. Mm-hmm. Players can be distracted because they're trying to frantically write down all the stuff that you're saying, and they'll miss things. Mm-hmm. They're forgetful, and maybe you aren't narrating it consistently or like in a consistent order or something like that. But that would all be fine in a normal game. But in a mystery, if you like repeatedly try to like make sure they're sure about things and say the same things over and over again, you're giving away the game.
Yeah.
And that's not good either, because they'll be like, okay, what would you like me to check out, DM?
Right. It's like, okay.
Right. So where I'm going is the 3-clue rule. So when you watch a movie or you read a book or something like that involves a mystery, most of the times the mysteries are like narratively satisfying, but they're insane, and no rational person would ever reach the conclusions that are reached by the protagonist. Right.
Yeah.
Because it will require some like crazy leap or a coincidence or something else that like gets them to the right conclusion, and that's not going to happen in your game. In your game, there are just like regular people trying to put the pieces together in a way that makes sense. And so if you're expecting it to be like an episode of Sherlock, it's not going to be. Mm-hmm. Because the things that Sherlock does in the TV show don't make any fucking sense.
Yeah.
So the 3-clue rule, the idea is if you mind map out the elements of the scenario, meaning like all the important concepts, whether they're people or clues or events or something like that, if you just kind of take those things and like, I don't know, imagine you write all those individual things down on their own index cards and put them on the floor, and then you take like a piece of yarn and you connect each one to each other thing that it has some plausible connection to. You will probably find that in these books and movies that I'm talking about, the connections, like the path or the possible paths that the protagonist could take in order to get from the beginning of the story to solving the mystery, are like really thin. There aren't many connections there, and so they have to get certain things in order to advance. And And that means, back to what we were describing before, if the only way to find out if the only way to find out when the murder took place, which is crucial to solving it maybe, is to notice that the victim's watch is like stopped, like it's cracked or something, and it froze at the time of their death.
A classic.
Then the only way a player can ascertain that is by having their character successfully make an intelligence check when they're like looking at the personal effects. Well, then if they roll poorly on that check, they lose the game.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do that. The 3-clue rule stipulates that basically there need to be at least 3 ways, like there need to be at least 3 paths or things that bridge from like chapter to chapter of the story. So the players have a fighting chance of, the players have a fighting chance of like making it all the way through. They can fumble one thing and they'll probably get one of the 2 others. Mm-hmm. So I do recommend for anyone trying to run a mystery doing this sort of mind mapping approach. And if you think your mystery is so complicated it'll take you too long to mind map, that's a mistake.
Yes.
That means you are being too ambitious.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of realize, and this is true for a variety of topics, not just for mysteries, but mysteries are a great example of it. There are a lot of interesting stories that do not map well to TTRPGs. There are things that it's like, hey, like if like write a book. Don't make this into a TTRPG, because the thing with if you're running a TTRPG, your players need to be an important part of it. It shouldn't just be a story where like the characters are totally interchangeable. It should be about those characters and their interaction with the situation. So if it's something that isn't kind of focused on that, you might be using it like the wrong medium to tell that story. So, and complexity of mysteries is a great example, because of the difficulty of communicating this stuff and bridging that gap, and the potential for people to miss things or whatever. Like a simple mystery in concept can become very complicated as the players interact with it. So you do not need to have this like really crazy Sherlock Holmes novel. To use the Sherlock example, that your characters are playing in. It can be something very, very simple, and just some of the randomness and the nature of your players and everything will make it much more complex. It's one of the reasons why some of the advice you'll find online, which I think is pretty good, is like be very careful if you're considering adding red herrings or false leads to your mystery. Like you really don't need to. Like the players, generally, not all players, but generally players will add their own red herrings, or they will come up with their own kind of, more maybe convoluted answers than what the truth is.
And the level of paranoia you will induce if you lay down a red herring, will derail your game.
Right. And to kind of, this is vaguely related to the 3-clue rule. One thing that I've been thinking about recently when it comes to mysteries is, one thing that you can do is kind of craft clues in a way that simply finding the clue is like, I didn't think of a good way to phrase this. Part of the problem you described is that finding the clue itself is something that is, something that you can have a lot of randomness with and can cause a lot of problems. You can create a mystery where finding the clues is trivial, right? They will kind of just naturally find all the clues pretty easily, and then but having those clues and putting it together, it's more a puzzle for the players, for them to be able to use their knowledge once they have all the clues to figure it out. And so you can kind of get rid of the problem of finding clues and make the clues themselves the puzzle. So here's an example from popular media. Duncan, have you read A Game of Thrones?
No, I'm not a nerd.
Okay. Well, near the beginning of the first book, there's an assassin who tries to kill the child of a lord. And this guy looks like he's, just like some street rat that somebody, paid a gold to, kill somebody. He ends up failing, but they realize that the knife that he has that he was going to use to kill this kid is like this very high quality knife. It's basically like a magic knife that, are incredibly rare, and like basically prized possessions of noble houses. So like the clue was really easy to find, like this dagger, but it introduces a mystery unto itself, that people can, follow up on, after that. You can do something similar when you're creating clues for the mysteries that you run in a TTRPG. The clue can be easy to find, but the clue itself is not an answer. It's a piece of the puzzle. And then so the problem isn't finding the clues. It's once I have the clues, what does it mean? And that I think can be a much more engaging experience for the table than, and it removes some of that headache of why won't they just look in the drawing desk, right? They don't have to. Like the way you set it up, they're gonna find them all. So, if you craft the mystery that way, which I'm not saying is easy, but it's just a different way of creating one. You can, I think, make it much more like thrilling for the table and much more interesting as a discussion to work through it as a group, than your traditional like, oh well, they just didn't find the knife, so oh well, or the knife is like has the name of the butler written on it, so as soon as they find it, the challenge was finding the clue. Now that they've got the clue, they solve the mystery. I think that's just a different approach you can have to running a mystery that can be a little more engaging.
Yeah, I agree, and I want to more clearly state the 3-clue rule because I fumbled it earlier. For any conclusion you want the players to be able to draw, you need to give them at least 3 clue opportunities to do so. Okay,
yeah. Similar, but yeah, important distinction.
But yeah, I think these types of sessions, for all the reasons that we've described, probably require more deliberate planning. Mm-hmm. And also benefit more than regular sessions from like some amount of red teaming by like an experienced player.
Right.
So I do this. I know a couple of other people who do this. Especially with Delta Green, like I have a couple of modules, published ones or personal ones that I'll run and I'll take notes on, and I will like sharpen and better develop over time. So every time I'm a little better at remembering where everything goes and what everyone's supposed to know. And sometimes you run one and the players really struggle reaching some of the conclusions that you want them to, and so you realize, okay, I need to drop another clue there to like firm that up, or another person needs to know the location of this thing so the players have a better shot at finding it. Things like that. But if you're trying to run something like this for the first time, you haven't had a chance to run it on one group and get notes from it, you may be able to just sit down and kind of do like an abbreviated run through of the game with a friend. You and I have done this before, Shepard, where I've said, okay, here's the basic setup. Boom, boom, boom. I'm going to introduce the players here, and here's what they're going to see. And you would say something like, okay, well, I would probably try to do this. I would ask that. And in 15, 20 minutes.
Skip the role play, just go through it mechanically.
Right. And so we've done this, and it's been a very useful exercise because I can take notes all the time and go, oh, yeah. It didn't even occur to me that they would try to do that. So I need to change this to that. Those kind of things.
Yeah. Or you could totally add these 2 clues up in a totally different direction than I was anticipating.
Right. Or this is much more obvious than I meant it to be, and I need to obscure this somewhat.
Right.
That's a less frequent adjustment. But,
sure. Yeah. That's a nice problem.
So, and I guess that's something we should talk about is the as a rule, things are less clear to the players than you think.
Right. For a variety of reasons.
Right, and especially if they go in knowing you're running a mystery, they will likely be just generally paranoid. Mm-hmm. And players will expect a level of complexity that you probably aren't shooting for.
Right.
So you'll say like, all right, and this guy walks out of the front of the bank, and his hands and face are covered in ink, and he's got like a big bag, like a duffel bag that's also covered in ink, and he's running out the front. And they'll be like, well, that's a little too obvious. So, I'm gonna go to the bank and I'm gonna actually, you know what? I'm not gonna go to the bank. We're gonna go to the coffee shop across the street and just watch it and kind of see.
We're gonna stake it out.
See what goes on.
Yeah.
Right, because it's like, I mean, the DM's not just gonna like put this guy right in front of us. Right. And yeah, so that stuff happens all the time. So, and this is again why you should not do red herring stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one thing to kind of think about too is, hey, what's the setting in which you're running this mystery? And by setting, I don't mean like, is it fantasy or modern or whatever. Like, what is the context for this mystery within a greater scheme of how you play this game? Are you running a mystery as a sub episode of a longer campaign? Are you running a standalone, like 1, 2, 3 shot kind of thing with new characters in a new setting? Or, somewhere in between these two things. Because, if you're running a standalone mystery in a new setting with new characters and all this stuff, then, assuming you're not running one like just in modern day where people have a lot of knowledge about the world and the assumptions they should make, then you have to present them with all of the information required during the session, sort of early on for a lot of it, to give them the ability to make, to draw any conclusions about stuff. And that needs to be a factor in your mystery, and maybe you need to lower the complexity as a result. If you're doing it as an episode of a longer campaign, and you've got a lot more like people and character relationships and history and all of this stuff, like just information that the players and their characters are aware of, then the way that you might want to organize that mystery and, the sort of what you have to play with going into it is a lot different. Because they already understand some of the relationships between people and will make assumptions based on it. So I think that's kind of important when you're thinking about running a mystery, is that greater context, because it's information that, most importantly, it's information for the players. And it can also provide you a foundation for your mystery, whereas you have to invent a foundation for it if you're just, starting from scratch somewhere else.
I think another thing worth considering there is, if the mystery is part of a larger campaign, it may be something where if they hit a dead end, they can revisit later.
Right.
Not really possible with a one-shot.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great point, where failure to solve the mystery in the campaign can actually be just really good narrative fuel, because if it later, comes up that they get an opportunity to solve it, or it just becomes resolved, through some other method, like i.e. the murderer, ends up killing someone else that they know as a result, and they catch him in the act, that's a resolution. It can be very dramatic. But yeah, if it's a one shot and they fail, then that's kind of a bummer of a night. So yeah, your appetite for failure, or failure is a strong word, but you know what I mean, like a less satisfying resolution maybe should be different based on that context as well. That's a great point.
Yeah, and so this kind of ties into something you talked about before, the burn it all down approach.
Yes, yeah.
So when you are writing a mystery, you need to be careful. Basically, you need to be careful with the incentives and like the win states that you lay down, in order to prevent what we call the burn it all down scenario. So if you allow the players to basically just blow up a building and wipe out whatever the bad thing is, and then say like, well, that's it. I don't need to infiltrate it. I don't really need to discover what's inside, because my mission was to just prevent bad thing from happening or something. And I can do that through massive overkill and skip a bunch of steps. That's a really unsatisfying way to play.
Mm-hmm.
And couple of antidotes to this. One is just, don't frame the scenario that way. Like, don't take that off the table somehow. Make it so that, maybe elements of this have to survive. And so,
right, there's a hostage in there that you need to rescue, or
right, or your organization needs to be much more discreet than that, or
there's information that you need to.
You have a man on the inside that needs to be protected, or whatever. There's a lot of ways to do this. Another thing is what will inevitably happen after your players blow up that building is. They're going to blow it up and you'll say, okay, well, the building blows up and everyone dies. Like, thanks for playing Delta Green. And your players will turn around and they'll be like, so what was in there?
Don't tell them.
Right? Do not tell them. I have a rule that players are not allowed. I will not disclose anything to them out of game, including when the game is over. So anything that they want to learn about the world, they have to do in character. And a lot of people don't like this rule and think it's unnecessary, but this is why I have it. Because some players will determine that the easiest way to satisfy their curiosity is just to end the scenario and then ask you questions.
Yeah. I'm guilty of this. I've done it.
Yeah, and I mean, you may hear that and think like, that's crazy. No one does this. It happens.
Yeah, why would you even play the game if that's what you were going to do?
Yeah. So think about that. Think about what you're incentivizing.
Yeah, and I think the second solution is definitely, good for kind of long-term habit teaching. But if you're not sure how many times you're going to be playing with these people or whatever, then I think the first solution probably is going to bear a little more fruit of just. Yeah, don't make it palatable to do that. And I don't think you'll find that it's particularly limiting to do that. Like, there are a broad variety of reasons why your heroes shouldn't want to just blow up a building, no matter how many baddies are inside of it. So I don't think that it's really that challenging. It's just something that you should consider, because if you're imagining one of these stories and the way you think it's going to unfold, it might not occur to you that the players would want to just, burn it all down, but it is a real reaction that a lot of players have. And again, I've been there. I've been one of them. And so, it is something that, even though it doesn't occur to you, it will almost certainly occur to at least one of your players, and that is a contagious plan as well. And I say that because there is a lot of appeal to it if you set up the scenario that way. If the job is to stop the spread of some whatever, or something like that, where the goal is destruction, then just destroying a lot more than anyone had thought was probable is a perfectly valid response to that prompt.
And going back to something you said previously, like, players will go in directions that you did not anticipate.
Yeah,
they will ask a question or want to interview someone or something, and you're like, well, shit, I didn't think about that. Like,
yeah.
That's very clever. That makes total sense. That's not what the answer is, but
yeah. No, I ran a session last weekend for the in-person crew that I play for here, and we do pretty much nothing but one-shots. And I did, sort of not thinking about it too much, I did some of the things that I mentioned earlier. I had clues that they were automatically going to find if they were, paying any attention at all. The only way they would miss them is if they straight up just walked through rooms without examining anything. Which I incentivized looking through stuff, because part of this dungeon crawl that I was running was that it was, I had just a box, like the box of 5th edition magic items, and if they found an item, I would just randomly pick one and hand it to them. Doesn't matter what it is, that's the item they get, which is just kind of funny. So I really incentivized them to make sure they were checking a lot of things. And so I gave them 3 clues that would tell them, a little information that they could use to put together to kind of figure out what the general gist of their situation was. And which is what I was getting after earlier of give them the clues, but the clues are not the answers, they're clues. And then and they actually figured it out, and I was like, oh, no way. I was not expecting that they were going to like actually come to the correct conclusion. And they actually did it twice in the session where I handed them something that was supposed to help them, and I was just praying that they would interpret it correctly, and they did, which is more luck than anything else. But yeah, your players will blow you away in positive and negative ways about like their interpretation of things, or what ideas and plans they have. It's mind-boggling.
I think that's all the big stuff I had.
Yeah, that's most of it. I mean, that's a lot of good topics. Mysteries are really, really fun, and I think that they are sort of an obvious step, like in the TTRPG scheme. I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing to start with when you're running, because it can tend to get a bit complex, as we've discussed. So I think it's something that it's good to think about and good to get to eventually, but it's not something that I would start with because it's just got so many typical pitfalls, even with experienced players.
I do have a final thing I want to say, and that's that mysteries are really better for organized players, and especially if you think it's going to go longer than a session. If I'm running a mystery, I really try to get it done in as few sessions as possible, ideally one. Mm-hmm. But if you can't do it in just one session, try to get to the next one relatively quickly. Yeah,
don't leave a month between them.
Right, because it'll just be really difficult for people to pick up the thread.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Similarly, this is something that greatly benefits from handouts.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's just good for like tactility of like, let's say they're going through the fireplace and they find a half-burned note. Make a half-burned note and hand it to them. Like that, people go absolutely bananas when they see stuff like that. It's neat, and it makes it feel really real.
Yeah.
So yeah, handouts are great. Mechanically also, yeah, in the sense that they've got something that you don't have to keep telling them over and over. So yeah. Those are great points. And so I recommend doing mysteries as something like, I think it's a great way to add some flavor to a longer campaign. If you've been doing a lot of dungeon crawls, or a lot more combat heavy, it can be a really interesting departure for your characters to like come back to town and then have to deal with an actual mystery, ideally with characters that they've actually interacted with before, so that they got some skin in the game.
But I do not recommend, if you're a first-time GM, jumping straight into a mystery. It's too much to handle.
Right, yeah. And again, just the Cliff Notes kind of recap of some of the stuff we've talked about. Like, don't make it too complex. And again, recommendations, but don't make it too complex. Don't add red herrings. Either make clues like kind of automatically findable, or have a lot of ways that 3-clue rule for people to be able to get the information they need to draw the conclusion that you want. And then if you have the opportunity, simulate it with somebody, do a little red teaming, some wargaming for it, and figure out if there are any like sort of obvious pitfalls or easy wrong conclusions they could come to, or something like that.
And play with people that want to play the tone and type of game you want to play, and communicate with them effectively about what that is.
Yeah.
Because if you try to force it, you will frustrate yourself and them.
Absolutely.